I come from a pretty messed up home. My dad left me and my mum when I was only 2, and she and I have been on our own ever since. It didn't matter. I never even knew him. But after about 10 years, my grandmother on my father's side wanted to reach out. She herself had only just found out about our existence, and after her husband had died, she was feeling the void of having no one. And I suppose that's what made her reach out to us. Not knowing your grandparents means that it can be quite hard connecting with them, which was certainly true in my case. However, after a long and boring evening at the mall, we came home and made s'mores and just had some friendly chit-chat. I was playing on an app on my phone, and she asked what I was. At the time, Five Nights at Freddy's was pretty big, and I tried explaining the concept of the game. She laughed for a little bit, and said that she had stories of real horrors that are far scarier than anything that can happen in a game. This piqued my interest, and I asked her about some of the things she had experienced in her lifetime. She told me many stories, and this really led to us growing a close connection, which I greatly valued, as she passed away quite recently. Point being, though, she never had any motive to lie. She loved telling me these stories, told me all the people in her family, and I really felt like I had a grasp of everything that was going on, as well as a far better understanding of what it must have been like growing up in her time. She told me one story, though, that will always stick with me. And it's only later that I found out about these black-eyed children did I piece all the puzzle pieces together. What I'm about to tell you is 100% true. I hope you enjoy. My grandmother came from a small town in Ireland. She had 3 sisters, and they lived together in a small house in a rural village. She told me that this village was the kind of place where you knew everybody, literally everyone, and that there wouldn't be a person that you would pass on the street who you didn't have some recollection of who they were and how they were related to someone else. It was quite different back in those days. Everything seemed to be centered in the town, and not many people came and went to other places. This detail is important, so hold on to it. Now, being that the village was quite small and that everyone knew everyone, it would be strange for someone unknown to pop into the village, right? Well, my grandma and her 2 sisters were just walking home from spending the evening with some other friends. It was quite dark out, and they were trying to rush home by the light of the moon, which was quite prevalent. It was a bitterly cold night, and they remember it quite well. As they made it home, all 3 of them started getting ready to go up to bed, as all 3 of them shared the same room. However, my grandmother thought she'd left something in her coat pocket, so downstairs she went in order to try and retrieve it. That's when she heard something. She was a bit confused, but nonetheless put her ear closer to the door to listen, bearing in mind it was quite dark. There she heard something, the scuffling of feet, and right before she went to open the door, did she hear, "Hello? Sarah? Sarah?" Now, of course, everyone in the town knew her name was Sarah, but this was a voice she was unfamiliar with. It was the voice of a young girl. There weren't many young girls in town, but perhaps it was someone who she'd overlooked. So she went to get the door and slowly creaked it open. "Hello?" she said. Down on the pavement did she see a young girl of about 8. The thing that was rather unsettling about this girl is that she was wearing a light summer top, and a skirt. She looked like if she were out there any longer, she would freeze to death. My grandmother instantly became concerned and wanted to bring her in out of the cold, but something was wrong. She looked up and down at this girl, who didn't seem to be in a hurry, and just had this very odd presence. Something wasn't right. How did she know her name? She'd never met this girl before, and before she even opened the door, she somehow knew that she was behind it. "Is everything all right, dearie?" she said. She looked up at my grandmother with these big, black eyes. In the dim light of the moon, she could make nothing out but inky blackness. She looked up at my grandmother and with a wry little smile said, "Please, let me in. I'm cold." My grandma thought that of course she'd be cold. She picked the completely wrong outfit to wear today. But what is an 8-year-old girl doing out in the middle of the night? So she asked her, "Who are you? What's your name? Why are you here? Where are your parents?" She barraged the little girl with questions. She, however, ignored each and every one of them and just said, "Please let me in. It's cold. I need to find my mummy." Now, my grandma was getting freaked out. It was incredibly unlikely that a girl from origins unknown who refused to answer these questions would be there in the middle of the night. Part of her thought that she was going insane. And she said that the police station was only down the road and to try there, and that they would be much better help. She slowly went to close the door, and that's when the little girl started getting angry. "Let me in. You have to let me in." My grandmother started freaking out and slammed the door shut, loud enough that one of her sisters came downstairs to ask what was wrong. Just before she could make it to the bottom step, did the child on the other end cry out, "Edith, Edith, please let me in. I'm cold." She looked at my grandmother, and they stared at each other, and she asked who was on the other side. My grandma said she didn't know, that she'd never met that girl before in her life, and that she wanted to come in, and that she had told her where the police station was. Edith said to not let anybody in, and that this would be something that Papa should deal with. So they went upstairs and woke up their father, who groggily came downstairs to check out the wannabe intruder. He opened the front door, ready to take the little girl to the police station, but she was gone. They'd been gone no more than 15 to 20 seconds. Then her father stepped out barefoot and looked around the streets, just up and down quickly. She explained that these streets were made in such a way that there could have been absolutely no way for that girl to hide so quickly. There's literally nowhere she could have gone. He stood there in awe, a bit dumbfounded, unsure if his girls were playing a practical joke on him. Then he went back inside, told them to forget about it, and go to sleep. The real kicker here is that my grandma had a nightmare that night about the girl with the jet black eyes, and that was something that she never forgot. Not only because of how creepy and out of place it was, but because of how she knew her name. Now, this only gets creepier still when I told her about the black-eyed kids phenomenon, and she quickly clocked that this was one of those. She never saw one since, and says that when someone knocks on the door, she has a look through the peephole, and if she didn't know them, she would never open it. It was about 2 years ago when I was 24. I was home alone and living with my mum, so that I could save up for my own plot of land, and that weekend she had went to stay at her boyfriend's house. The night came fast, as I spent the day relaxing by reading some books that I'd neglected because of work. As it grew later into the night, I was about to get some sleep when there was a knock at the door. It was odd that anyone would be out this late in my neighborhood. It was fairly safe, but full of old people. Curious, I walked over to the door and called out to see who it was. "Can I help you?" There was a pause, before a small voice called right back. "Excuse me, miss. I'm cold and I'm hungry. May I come in?" Now, this would normally pull at most people's heartstrings with how sad and hopeless the childlike voice sounded. But I knew better. I live in the south of Texas, and everyone knows that it's rarely cold down here. Plus, it was the middle of summer, and 90 degrees outside. Grinning, my mind automatically went back to the horror stories I'd listened to. I quickly locked the door and reached for the twin swords that my brother gave me for my last birthday. They might not have been sharp since they were display models, but the end was pointy. "Sorry, I don't let strange kids come into my house in the middle of the night. Try next door." Some shuffling was heard, as it sounded like it got closer to the door. It was quiet for a while, and I placed my ear closer to the door to detect any more sounds. "You must let me in, Tiffany." Now I've heard about some stories about the BEKs. Somehow they know the person's name, but it was still weird to hear it call out to me with such a monotonous tone. I looked over to the side window and decided to try and catch a peek at what this one looked like. I peeled back the curtain and found a boy of 12 standing at my front door. He wore a large long-sleeve shirt and baggy pants. His dark hair was slightly long and covered his eyes well. "Why must I let you in? I don't know you, and I'm pretty sure that you're one of the black-eyed kids." I saw the kid smile and turned his head and look at me through the small gap in the curtain. His bangs shifted and revealed his eyes. The stories do not do them justice. Instead of being pure black and glossy, they were almost like a deep liquid black that seemed to suck you in. I watched as he came over to the window and placed his hand right by my face, a shiver going down my spine as he did so. "You'll let me in one day." My mouth had gone dry as I kept staring into his eyes. I felt almost like it was telling me to unlock the door and to let him in. I knew that I couldn't, though. There were too many mysteries about them and what they would do. "How can you be so sure?" I finally asked, knowing that I might not like his answer. Something about this kid was creeping me out, and yet I could feel a pull to his words. I didn't know how long we were going to be like that, just staring at each other. But the words he spoke to me as he walked away was something I'll never forget. "Because you're one of us." Every night since then, I think back on the words he left me. As far as I know, the black-eyed kids have always just been that. Kids. So what did he mean that I was one of them? I'm 26 now, and I have a feeling that I will see him again in the near future. Maybe I can get him to tell me more. I was parked next to a lake with my ex, no prizes for guessing why, when we saw a kid walk past our car, and they looked like they were trying to slash my tire. As you can imagine, I was pissed, so I got out and went to grab the kid. Now, I'm 6'5", so if I get out of a car looking pissed, most people would run. This kid just stared at me. I could tell there was something wrong straight away. I told him to go away and to leave us alone. He turned on the spot and walked up a lane past an old school, and I walked to the edge of the path to make sure he was really going. It was too late. he just disappeared into thin air. There was nowhere he could have hidden in the space of 5 seconds, and on each side of the lane was a lake, which was fenced with 6-foot railings on the other side, with a stone wall on the side of the school. There weren't any trees or vegetation. He was just gone. When I got back to the car, my girlfriend said she thought he was a little young to be doing drugs and slashing tires. When I asked why, she said, well, his pupils were very dilated, and she couldn't even see the whites of his eyes. Then I realized why his blank stare seemed off. His eyes were black, and his eyes seemed to look into me rather than at me. I'm not sure what the entity was, whether it was a ghost or something else. I did feel quite uneasy. The stare really got to me. Perhaps a demon. Perhaps it was one of the infamous black-eyed children. Maybe I'll never know. The year is 1999. A childhood acquaintance wanted to introduce me to one of their friends from work. We were in our late teens/early 20s at the time. The person he was introducing me to was probably in his mid-30s. This was a little unusual, because usually we stuck with people around our age group. The guy drove a classic car with tinted windows, and had a retro look to him. I'm not sure how it came up, but within an hour of meeting, he showed me some small glass vials filled with liquid, and 2 black discs suspended in the liquid. He demonstrated them. They were full eye contacts that even covered the white part of his eye, and made them look black. He went on to tell me how he had them custom made for $400. I asked him why. After all, $400 was a lot of money back then, and he said, for fun. This was before anyone knew anything about the black-eyed kids phenomenon, and I really didn't think much of it. Fast forward to late 2008, to early 2009. I was leaving home for a night on the town, which was at least an hour's drive away. I stopped at a gas station just before getting on the freeway, approximately 40 minutes from my destination. It was dark outside, being 9 p.m. I go to the gas station and grab a Red Bull, and see a woman standing an aisle over from me. She was wearing a black leather jacket, and had short blonde hair down to her jawline. I estimated her age mid-30s to early 40s. Then I heard her ask the attendant, "Is Falador north or south of here?" This was a location everyone would know, and I immediately thought it was a weird question. Why on earth would someone be at a place like this, asking which direction this town 100 miles away was? Then it happened. She turned around, looked directly at me, and her eyes were completely black. I thought to myself, oh my, and then I froze for a moment, not knowing what to do. I waved it off as strange and continued about my evening. The evening was fairly normal, and I went out to meet with a few people. But heading home, I ran into a problem. I was driving home on the freeway, and there was hardly any traffic out. There was a large, heavy-duty pickup truck following me way too close, and I was approximately 2/3 of the way home at this point. I remember getting blasted by an all-encompassing white light. My brain processed it as light, but seemed to not be directional, and did not cast shadows and filled up every space like a thick mist. Next thing I know, I'm still driving on the freeway, and the truck is gone. I look over to the lane to the left, and some girl plastered her face and both hands on the window staring at me. I figured she was trying to build up some kind of hysteria, or just acting goofy. I continued home. It wasn't until that I looked up at the clock that I noticed there was 2 hours of missing time. Since this time, I've noticed a trend of women with shoulder-length blonde hair seemingly stalking me from time to time. Usually, when this happens, an event of extreme strangeness or paranormal activity occurs. I don't think it's the same woman, but they all fit the same profile. This happened over the summer of 2014, when I was 12 years old. I lived in Texas, but this happened in Louisiana, when me and my family were visiting relatives from my mother's side of the family. We stayed at our grandmother's old lake house, which was right by her actual house. It was late, maybe midnight, and I was in bed next to my brother, who at the time was 10. All of a sudden, I hear a knock on the door. Our room was the closest to the door, and each door was made out of glass. I know my grandfather was very rich. He had 4 houses in each city like Louisiana, including his former office, that he placed upstairs. He had 4 houses in each city of Louisiana, including his former office that he placed upstairs, so that we could sleep like it was a hotel room. As I got up, I opened the bedroom door. I proceeded with caution into the living room, and then walked up to the front door, where I saw 2 young boys. One was white, and the other African American. They looked to be about 10 or 12, the same age as my brother and I, and they wore hoodies. I stared at them for a few moments, cautious as to why 2 kids our age would be knocking on the door in the middle of the night. The elder of the 2 spoke up, and the other was nervously looking around. The kid had the voice of a young man. He had light brown hair and said, "Howdy, partner. You look nice. Could you let us in? We got lost at a party. Could you let us in so that we could call our mum?" I was gonna, but I was afraid I'd get in trouble for letting in strangers in past dark. But then I thought that they were just kids around mine and my brother's age. But then I thought about something else. Something that I had learnt in 3rd grade, about how some strangers use kids to help kidnap other kids. So I stopped myself. I wanted to call for my parents, but it felt like someone was controlling me and making me not to. "Don't call for your parents, buddy. Just let us in." He literally read my mind. It was only about 5 seconds after that I got a proper good look at their eyes, which were solid black. No pupil, no iris, just solid black. They were not human. The elder one spoke up again. "Come on, James. I can only come in if you let me in." I nearly jumped. How did he know my name? So what was he, some kind of creature? How the hell did he know that? Then suddenly, the younger of the 2 boys spoke for the first time. "Please, dude. We're lost and scared." I tried running back to bed, but it felt like my feet were nailed to the floor. "Please, can we come in?" After about 5 attempts, I was finally able to move and run away to my nice, cozy bed. I could still hear them tapping on the door and saying to let us in. I eventually fell asleep and woke up next morning and decided to make my way downstairs in order to investigate. Had it all been a dream, or was it real? I opened the door and saw nothing. Obviously the kids were no longer here. But just before I fully closed the door, did something small catch my eye. A scrunched up piece of paper on the ground. I opened it up, and it read, "You're very smart, James." I recently revisited the place 2 times after, because we had to for family vacation, but I don't plan to again. This happened about 3 months ago. I was driving along the road with my girlfriend. It was about 9 or 10 p.m. at night, and very cold. We had just pulled onto a parking to buy a few groceries in a market, and some girl came up to us before we got out of the car. She wasn't much older than 13 years old, had pigtails and a baby pink dress. She seemed harmless. Both of us felt low-key threatened and scared by her, though. It was dark, so we didn't notice right away that the thing that stood out the most from her was the eyes. They were pitch black. Just looking at them made me feel dizzy and scared. We were in the car when the girl asked, "Let me in and take me home." It's a child, but with black eyes. And I mean, I'm obviously not going to do that. I locked my side of the door, and my girlfriend felt a little bit upset and asked me to let her in. The girl ran to my girlfriend's side of the car just as I was locking her side of the doors too. She started to slam on the windows and yell to let her in, and I quickly started the car and we drove off freaking out. When we turned around, the girl was going to the next driver that just parked the car. We didn't do or say anything. We just drove back home. I immediately checked everything, and we found out that children with black eyes are an actual thing. So friends, if a child who has black eyes ever tries to talk to you or comes near you, you just don't look back. Who knows what could happen? I am a 911 operator. We get a lot of outlandish calls, but there's one that stands out. I received a call late one night from a home invasion in progress. The woman was freaking out because two men, a tall lanky man with a wrench and a short fat man with a hammer, had let themselves into her apartment as she had forgotten to lock the door, and woke her up by banging on the walls in her living room. When she went to investigate, the men claimed to be members of the apartment staff on call to fix her air conditioning unit. She told them she had made no such call and asked them to leave at once. The men insisted and dove behind her and behind her couch and armchair, where they remained silent, their bald heads occasionally peeking out of the corners of the furniture. When the 911 call came in, my caller was frantic as she described the scene, constantly interrupting herself to shriek and plead with the two men, demanding that they leave and that the police were on their way. I remained on the line with her as my officers went en route so that I could update them on developers. However, my caller continued only to describe their bald heads, rasping breath, and abnormally large black eyes tracing around her room. Roughly 5 minutes into the call, things changed. My caller said that the men had ducked down completely behind the furniture, and she could no longer see them. I advised my caller to remain where she was and not to search for the intruders, as she informed me that she was intending to, and the officers were just pulling into her apartment block. I heard a knock at her door as my officers entered, and oddly enough, I began to hear a dog barking through my headset. Clearly, in cases such as home invasion, a dog present will be barking constantly, and it only begins as my officers entered the home. I muted my voice and remained on the line as my officers cleared the apartment. All the while, the woman desperately described to the officers that the men must have sunken back down through the shadows on the floor, as they usually do when they're about to be caught. My officers concluded after a full sweep of the apartment that everything was clear, and that the woman had mistaken her furniture, a love seat, the short fat man, and a high-backed chair, the tall slender man, as the intruders. We currently have the residents flagged, but I'll never be able to shake her description of the two intruders staring at her with those black eyes. I was home alone on Thanksgiving 2015. It was the evening, and I heard some knocking. Being in a festive and playful spirit, I opened the door without looking, and automatically felt a deep sense of regret, sort of like a literal "oh shit" moment. I didn't know where it was coming from until I started actively trying to place what was wrong with the situation. And that's when I realized the person on the other end of the doorframe didn't have any whites in their eyes. For a few seconds I thought, isn't Halloween already over? And was confused until the oldest boy made eye contact with me. And that's when literally I felt like I was staring death in the face. They wanted to come in, and the way they spoke made it seem like they knew that I was thinking, and they were actively mocking my helplessness. I slammed the door on them, turned on all the lights and started watching TV, while they stood outside and would occasionally knock. I feel like I lost a good 6 hours of time, because I don't even remember when I fell asleep, or what I was watching. I remember when I first sat down, Gabriel Iglesias was playing, but I don't remember a thing. And when I woke up it was 2 a.m, and the lights were all off, and static was on the TV. I have Dish Network, and there were no power outages in my area, and I didn't get static if Dish were to go out. I'd get a channel listed as HDMI and a black screen, or it would be the introduction screen, where it would show two people talking about the features of Dish Network. Also, if the lights went out, they would come back on. I had to literally switch the lights on and off a few times just to get it to work. No one was home. After that, I would occasionally see them outside, and every time it would be pin drop silence, and my lights would occasionally go out, or something would lose power like my dish. One time, my phone was on 63% and dropped to 1% in 5 minutes. After a few months of being afraid to every knock, I decided to call a holy man to bless the house. I also saged the house and bought a lot of different surahs, or psalms, to put in every room, including the bathroom. Since then, the visits have stopped. However, a few months after that, I remember hearing a blood-curdling scream and a banging on the door. I looked through the peephole and saw nothing. A few months ago, my mother and I heard a banging coming from the front door, and the same thing. No one was there. I don't know if it was them, or someone coming back just to play a prank, but I was scared. I'm just going to come out and say it. I hate UPS. I'd been ordering some stuff as part of my business, and as always it was late. Then I get a notification that my package had failed to be delivered because I wasn't home, which is just perfect. It was something incredibly important that I needed that very day, and my business inevitably suffered as a result. Needless to say, I was pissed, so I managed to get it redelivered for the next day. So there I am, waiting for the package at my house. It's about midday, which is roughly when the UPS man comes, and I was very wary of my door. A knock, a buzz, a tapping, anything. I was going to be there in a flash, because I couldn't risk missing the package today. Even though I didn't miss it, the guy just never came to the door yesterday. But anyway, I was waiting and waiting, just doing some painting in the meantime to try and get advanced on other work, when I hear a gentle tap at my door. As you can imagine, I run to the door as fast as I can, and swing the door open, ready to sign for my delivery, only to be met with nothing. That's when I look down and see a small boy of about 8 in an oversized sweatshirt. Now, there are 2 things wrong with this. Number 1, shouldn't this kid be at school? And number 2, it is absolutely scorching outside. Why is he in a sweatshirt in the middle of the day? I look down at the little boy who's staring helplessly at my feet and say, "Can I help you?" with a quite pissed off tone, as I was really expecting this package. He keeps looking down at my feet, shuffling his own, and says, "Please, mister, can I come in? I need to use your phone." Now, the neighborhood I live in isn't all that great, so even though this has never happened to me before, I immediately was on edge and was uneasy at the request. I stoop down to his level and say, "Look, son, I'm not going to be able to let you in, but I can call for someone to come and collect you. Is everything all right?" The kid, avoiding eye contact, still staring down at my knees this time, and says, "No, Liam, I need to come in and use your phone." It was at that moment that I about shat a brick. How the hell did he know who I was? "Come on, Liam, please let me in." I was so freaked out by this. I got up slowly, and that's when his gaze started leaving the floor, and he looked me dead in the eyes. His eyes were jet black. They were a black, blacker than black. I can't even begin to describe how dark his eyes were, but they weren't just a colour. It was almost a feeling of pure dread and malice, and everything wrong in the world was encompassed inside those eyes. I remember staring at him, and then nothing. I woke up about 3 hours later on the floor of my home. My door was closed, and when I got up, I'd received another notification that the UPS delivery man had failed to deliver once more. So now I was confused and furious. I wasn't sure what happened, but I was quite freaked out. It's only later that I learnt of the phenomenon known as the black-eyed kids. I don't know what happened to me within that time that I lost, but part of me doesn't want to find out. Let me start by setting the stage for this encounter that happened a few years back. It was Christmas night, and I was working at a decent-sized factory in New England as a security guard for the night shift. The factory was built in the 1900s and is located at the end of a residential suburban street, which was common for the time. Being at Christmas time, all the other employees and guards but myself were home for the holidays, as I sat in the security office, which is detached from the main building next to gate number 1. Around 2 a.m, I look up from the computer monitor to see 3 girls on the younger side, maybe 12 or 13, about 20 yards away, standing at the telephone pole, staring directly at me. It's not uncommon to see children in the area, as it is a neighborhood, but at 2 a.m. on Christmas night? Come on. I tried to ignore it and continued to look down the computer monitor, until only about 20 seconds later, I look up and started hearing a tapping on the locked office door. As you guessed it, it was the girls. A confused and nervous look painted my face, as the girls just started giggling. Can I help you?" I raised my voice. They stood there with an evil grin on their pale faces. "Let us in," they said, with jet black eyes staring right into me. At this point I was speechless. My heart sank and realized how creepy this situation was. I told them to go away with a stern voice, and got up and shut the lights. No sooner did I sit back down, they were right back where they had started, by the telephone pole, looking at me with an emotionless face. And just like that, they were gone. I watched the cameras for hours after, seeing if they were going to show up again. As you can imagine, I didn't leave the guardhouse until morning. They might have only been young girls, but something about them did not seem right. My brothers and I were staying at my grandma's house. One night, from memory, this was between 12:30 and 1. There was a knock at the door. It was rapid and woke up the whole household, although this was in part because it set the dogs barking like crazy. I'm assuming that my nan was not going to answer the door at first because it was late, but eventually she did. We heard her talking to someone for a while, and the door closed. We went downstairs to see what had happened, and my nan was physically shaking. She told us that a young boy in a black trench coat under the age of 16. When she opened the door, he put his hands out in front of their dog's face, who immediately stopped barking. The boy had asked several times to come inside, but refused to comment on why he wanted to. He also refused to tell her where his parents were. My nan didn't want to let him in, but she struggled to close the door on him. She couldn't explain why, but explained that she knew she wanted to, but had to fight physically to do it. When she looked out the window the moment she closed the door, she looked out and couldn't see him anywhere. But the thing that stood out the most was his jet black eyes. Nowhere did he have any sort of white or colouring, and that really frightened her.